Great. Looks like we are pretty close to a full house now, so why don't we get started? Thank you, everyone, for taking the time for this meeting. Know everyone's got a day job, and so can really appreciate the time and the commitment. Just to introduce myself, I'm John Paralisi. I'm the Spark project director who came on board in December to help structure the process as well as lead the efforts throughout the process. One thing I'll note, I will be facilitating a good amount of the session, but that's all I am for this really as a facilitator. You are all on this because you're all the subject matter experts, which I'm not in this area. So really appreciate you're committing to help out on this and making sure that you contribute all of your perspectives, which is why you were nominated to be on this panel. In that vein, as I walk through the document and feel free to chime in, ask a question, make a point as we go through it. Probably the first half of the document is going to be much more level setting, in terms of the process and where we are and setting some context. In the second hour of the, we'll have a lot more time for discussion. So, and a lot of time for collaboration around areas to focus. That being said, if you have a question along the way, just feel free to chime in and we can talk it through. Next slide.
It looks like John may have dropped off the meeting. We'll give him a second to reconnect.
Just as a word of advice, when you see a little X show up in the back of the screen, don't hit it because it will knock you off the thing entirely. So, but I am back now. Anyway, in terms of the agenda, I'm assuming, can everyone hear me just to make sure?
Yes, thanks, John.
Right, sorry, once again, sorry about that. In terms of the agenda, I'm going to go through kind of 5 main points. One is just spend about a half an hour, probably less than that, in the overview around level setting on the purpose of the advisory panels, rules of engagement, give the panelists a chance to introduce themselves to each other. Then talk about the context from a funding standpoint and some of the early areas of focus that some work was put into in terms of getting a situation assessment, and you should have gotten the pre-reads around that. Have discussions around the areas of needs, go in a little bit more detail. And then we're going to have a collaborative exercise at the end so that we want to make sure that we're capturing all the areas, at least at the outset, to focus on and understand some of the areas where people, even just coming out of the gates, think the greatest opportunity or need might lay. And then at the end, we will wrap up around where we're going next after this, as well as a little bit around some of the resources that are going to be available to the panelists. On slide 2, next slide. If you're in the orientation sessions, you've seen this slide before. The goal around the panel really is to be expansive, at the start in order to make sure that we're getting all the ideas on the table. And those ideas can come from a number of different sources, either from, in the case more so of a lot of the other panels, the listening tours that have been going on for months, as well as as feedback from agencies, previous proposals that have been put forward, as well as submissions now that the submission form is open through the formal submission template. We also anticipate, though, that after we get through the needs analysis, that there are going to be a lot of ideas that the panel itself comes up with, seeing what's coming from the submissions and just based on your expertise. The goal is for us to be able to kind of capture all those ideas, fairly quickly filter them in terms of identifying which ones are viable based on, could they fit within allowability from Treasury? And also, do they largely fit within the guiding principles of the Spark Committee that they put forward that I'll touch on shortly? Then to take the ideas and to score them, to understand on things like impact and feasibility, which ones would rise to the top in the eyes of the panel. And then finally, at the end, the panel being able to sit back and determine what type of recommendation they want to put forward to the Spark Committee. Keeping in mind that, just kind of the list of, say, the top 10 highest scoring ideas may not constitute what you want to put forward. For instance, idea 15 could be lower ranking on its own, but it may be an enabler for everything else. So every single one of the panels is going through this process. So at the end of this, the chairs of the panels will have a chance to be able to review those proposals with the Spark Committee and have some back and forth around that. And also the intent is that there are going to be more ideas in aggregate that could be funded. And that's by design, so that the Spark Committee itself has a chance to be able to make some trade-offs at their level across a large number of high priority ideas. The other thing to keep in mind is that even if ideas don't get funded, the good thing is that this isn't the only funding source or the only opportunity to think about how to implement an idea that could add a lot of value. So we're going to make sure that we capture all the ideas, and regardless of whether they go forward through this process or not from a funding standpoint, make sure that they continue to have a life past this. Slide 3 basically outlines what is going to be going from each one of the panels from a deliverable standpoint to the Spark Committee, so that they're able to think about kind of the integrated priority set with a detailed enough fact base and a fact base that's consistent across the panels. So even farther to the left of this, they would get even the set of ideas and submissions that didn't make it through the filter, right? They may not have been viable for this process, but at least they'll know, the ideas that the panel didn't move forward with through the funnel. Then for each viable idea, a outline on a template of what that idea entails, as well as being able to see how those ideas scored and what constituted that scoring, as well as the final recommendation from the panel around the areas, the proposal areas, the detail below that. So this is meant to be kind of a package to the Spark Committee so that they can, take this into account, as they're thinking about setting that overall integrated priority set. Slide 4 outlines the guiding principles that the Spark Executive Committee put in place a number of months ago for what they wanted to get out of this process, as well as the types of ideas that they were most interested in funding. So these are going to be important for us to always be thinking about, because as they see what's coming from the advisory panels, they're definitely going to have these guiding principles top of mind. So one is around prioritizing sustainable programs and investments through one-time use of funds versus things that are going to create substantial expansion of existing services or budgetary requirements. The second is looking at opportunities to combine with or leverage local and agency funds to maximize the use of these funds, because these funds, even with the allowability constraints, are more discretionary, more flexible. And so it's important to understand, what the sweet spot is of things that we want to kind of fund with this set of funds. The third point and the kind of primary lens of the Spark Committee: foster long-term systemic impact for Kansans. A lot of the previous sets of funds, have been focused a lot more on, the emergency response to COVID, shorter duration time frame. This is a chance to look in an integrated way at things that strategically can really make a difference over the long term for Kansas. Not that everything else wasn't important, but this is a chance to really think about things that could, set Kansas on a continued positive direction. Fourth, consider equitable opportunities and outcomes, and a lot of that is built into the allowability requirements from Treasury. Enable flexibility within the investment strategies, and one thing to think about is that in some cases, the ideas, that word idea that we use, will be maybe a specific project because it's just that well defined. And there may be more of those in this panel than the other panels. In some cases, it may be more programmatic in nature. So we're going to need to, have a little bit of flexibility around the outputs here, and then ensure the results are measurable to enable tracking and transparency, as well as this process itself. And so one thing to note for everyone, in case they didn't know, is that, all of these sessions are being recorded and streamed. So given that, I'm going to hand on the next slide is the team itself. And so, we thought this would be an opportunity for Representative Waymaster to kind of begin to get people to kind of introduce themselves, their perspectives, so that, we all kind of get a little bit of a better perspective of everyone's backgrounds and goals.
All right, thank you, John. As John mentioned, I'm Representative Troy Waymaster, and I serve the 109th Kansas House District for the state of Kansas, which is basically in central Kansas. I'm also the chairman of the Appropriations Committee in the House of Representatives, and I'm going to be the chairman for the Efficiency and Modernization Advisory Panel for Spark. I actually had the privilege, along with Kathy Wolfmore, Representative Kathy Wolfmore, who's in my office as well. We went through the Spark process with the CARES Act money that the Spark Committee was created to go through about a year ago. And this is a different process than with the CARES Act money, because the CARES Act money was much more specific and defined on how we would spend those dollars. And we also had a pretty tight time frame that we had to spend that money by December 30th, although when that time came, then Congress decided to extend it. But it was very specific on what those dollars could be used for. The American Rescue Plan Act money, or the ARPA funds, are a little bit different because Congress was not as specific on what we could utilize those funds for. And that's why the 4 advisory panels were created to go through those dollars. So right now, we're going to go ahead and do introductions for all of the members that'll be serving on the Efficiency and Modernization Advisory Panel. And we'll just go for about a 1-minute introduction. Tell us a little about yourself, and then exactly what your expectations are for your purpose being on the advisory panel. So I'll now turn it over to our vice chair, Representative Mark Hutton.
Former representative.
I know, former representative. I still call you representative.
Thank you, Chairman Waymaster. Mark Hutton. I am by vocation a general contractor. I did have the opportunity and the privilege to serve 4 years in the House of Representatives back a while back. I currently serve on the Kansas Board of Regents for my public service tour of duty right now. I am a recovering politician, and I'm looking forward to the key. I'm just excited about the chance to look at one-off opportunities for making our government more efficient and modernize. I think we've got a rich target environment there. Look forward to working with everybody. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mark. Next, Senator Michael Fack.
Thank you, Representative Waymaster. Michael Fagg, District 14. This is starting my second year as a state senator from District 14, which is like a 10-county area east of Wichita. Was in banking for 47 years and retired. I've been the mayor of El Dorado. I'm excited to have the opportunity. This is a big deal for Kansas, and looks like we got a great team to hopefully get some great ideas. Give you a little background on my committees. Right now, I'm on Ways and Means on the Senate side. I'm also vice chair of financial institutions / insurance on utilities, and also ag / natural resources. So I'm excited to get to know all of you. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to play musical chairs in my office, and so I'm going to introduce Representative Kathy Wolf.
Thank you, Troy, and thank you for sharing your office with me. My name is Kathy Wolf-Moore. I've been in the legislature for, well, this is my 12th year. I'm from the 36th district, which is Western Wyandotte County. I serve as the ranking Democrat on the Appropriations Committee with Representative Waymaster, and I also serve on the Health Committee. When I'm not here, I work in the healthcare industry. I work for the University of Kansas Health System. I've done that for the last 15, 16 years. I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm thrilled to be on this advisory panel. There is so much excitement and interest in my community, and I know communities around surround Wyandotte County, about the opportunities this is going to give them to do some real transformational work. So I'm thrilled to be on it, and anxious to serve with all of you. And thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Kathy. The next would be Tanya Heffel.
Hello, I'm Tanya Heffel. I apologize I'm not on video, but I'm actually driving home and I can hold the meeting for the 2 hours. I'm Tanya Heffel. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the state of Kansas. I just actually recently relocated to Kansas from Washington, D.C. area. Have about 28 years of experience in IT across pretty much the whole entire stack. And I'm looking forward to seeing how my experience, along with being relatively new to Kansas, can help to enhance the infrastructure and technology platform for both state operations and its citizens. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Tanya. Next is Joe Mandala.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Joe Mandala, I'm the Chief Information Officer for the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. We run as well the infrastructure for the Kansas Criminal Justice Information System. It's an enterprise of about 12,000 users and about 1,600 agencies here in the state, all public safety agencies. Been with the Bureau for about 14 years, going on 15 years. In previous lives, I was in IT in community mental health agencies and worked in the banking industry as well in IT. I've been in IT for longer than I care to admit, and I am looking forward to seeing what we can put together here for our state.
All right, thank you, Joe. Next, we have Frank Burnham.
Thank you. Frank Burnham, I'm the Director of Facilities for the Kansas Department of Administration, also a licensed architect. This is my 22nd year of state service. I live here in Topeka, and I'm just looking forward to participating and assisting any way I can. We touch a lot of agencies and work with contractors, work with professional services all across the state of Kansas, also in leasing. So I think we certainly looking forward to it and looking forward to what this can do for Kansas and those that we serve. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Frank. Next, Matt Billingsley.
It's sure an honor to serve on this advisory panel. Just a brief introduction of myself. I have a little over 21 years with a Fortune 500 company, and then I owned my own company for about 20 years, and then I served under the Brownback administration, director of real estate for DCF, and then the Office of Secretary of Revenue. I find this to be a very interesting and hopefully a helpful part for myself, and to be able to give any feedback that I can. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. John Wilkes.
Hi, my name is Michael Wilkes. I'm the city manager in Olathe. It's technically John Michael, but I go by Michael.
Okay.
So
We're
that's it.
got a little confused in our office, so we'll call you Michael
Yeah,
from
no
now
worries. No worries. I have the curse of parents who call me my middle name instead of my first name. So I've gotten that all my life. So anyway, yeah, I'm the city manager in Olathe. I've been here for just finished up my 23rd year and been in local government in various places across the country for about 36 years, and just looking forward to serving on the committee and seeing how I can just give a different perspective to the committee. So looking forward to it.
All right, thank you, Michael. And the last individual we have is Shane Mathis. Shane? And I wonder if he's not on the call. So
sorry about that. I am on.
You are, okay.
I was
Go ahead,
trying to unmute. Sorry about that. Yeah, Shane Mathis, thank you very much. To echo everybody else, I'm very excited to be on the committee. My background is really in the private sector, energy efficiency, construction, much like what Mark's company does. But also we've spanned the ag industry as well. We do a lot of renewable natural gas projects with dairies and swine farms around the country. So again, thrilled to be here, and hopefully we can add some value.
all right, thank you, Shane. And it was great to hear all of your backgrounds and your introductions. And I know we're going to be looking forward to the next few weeks of going through what would be best and how we can utilize the ARPA funds to better the state of Kansas. We're also going to be having some staff members who are going to be helping us. And so the state agency staff is Andrea Clark, and she supports the overall Spark process management and communications and coordination with agencies. We also have with Kansas Legislative Research Department, Andrew Finson and Amy Deckard, and they'll provide additional research on submitted ideas, compile information, and share legislative developments. And then we do have some consulting staff with Anna Silk, and she'll be the support meeting materials development, support idea submission scoring, and prioritization, and then also have the ability or the allowability for review. So those are our staff members. This is our advisory team. I know that the vice chair and myself look forward to working with all of you, as I mentioned before, to utilize the funds that the state of Kansas has received from the federal government, so we can better the state of Kansas and make us more efficient and more modern. So right now I will turn it over to back to our facilitator, John Paralisi. John.
Great. Thanks, Representative Waymaster. Go to the next slide. So we got your juices flowing so that I could go through this slide with you next. The good thing about this slide is we wanted to get on one page kind of the entire integrated process to show how all the pieces fit. The downside of this slide is because of that, it's pretty complex, but let me just kind of walk through the high points of it. In terms of, if you go just to orient under advisory panels and meetings, there's a common flow across all of the advisory panels. Most of you, if not all of you, are in the orientation session, and you see the little "we are here" below there, and we're in the kickoffs right now. The goal across each one of the advisory panels is to do some situation assessment work, identify the key needs, begin to see what comes in through submissions, and brainstorm on opportunities as well around the areas of need. Create the big list, filter it somewhat based on things that fit from an allowability standpoint, rank and score the ideas that are viable, and then kind of create a portfolio from that. That time frame is pretty aggressive. It's the February-March time frame. With the goal of early April, the chairs of each one of the panels reviewing the recommendations from their panel with the Spark Committee. And that will give some time then in April for there to be some integrated decision-making at the Spark Committee, and also some back and forth between the Spark Committee and the advisory panels around requests for further information or further work, with the goal that at the start of May, the Spark Executive Committee's created one integrated priority set of recommendations to go to the State Finance Council One thing to note here, I mentioned it before, once again, is that there should be more priorities in aggregate going to the Spark Executive Committee. Then we'll be able to be funded so that they can make some trade-offs. One of the comments that I've heard as I came on board was that as important as any of the individual investment requests are, at the same time, it would be nice to know when you're saying yes to any individual request what you're saying no to. This is the opportunity then to be able to put enough things that are all kind of high priorities in front of the Spark Committee so that they will know what trade-offs they're making. And as I mentioned before, the thought shouldn't be that just because if an idea doesn't get funded, in this funding stream, that it's going to go away, because there are other funding streams, other opportunities for good ideas to move forward. So just want to set that context up front. Next slide. So for this particular advisory panel, this is how the process lays out over 5 meetings. And we are now in the kickoff. And as I mentioned before, the main goal is just kind of forming the team, setting the context, beginning to provide some sort of an idea around the situation and areas of need, at least coming out of the gates, and provide maybe even some examples to think about. But at the end, really to open it up for the panel itself to really start thinking themselves, where do we think the greatest areas of needs might be? The initial recommendations or thought starters are really just meant to be that. And if we want to add, or you want to add other areas, we can certainly add them. And we'll get a chance to feel kind of from a voting exercise we're going to do, just kind of where the initial thoughts are from the panel itself, as where the greatest opportunities might lie. Next slide. So in terms of this panel, a few things that I'd like to say out of the gates. And it's interesting to hear, so many people, which shouldn't be surprising, on this particular panel have a background in construction. I'm actually based out of Dallas, and I came here 15 years ago to be the head of strategy at a commercial construction company. And, the one thing as we analyzed kind of what set apart our most successful projects from the ones that weren't as successful was that, the one thing we knew on every single project that we did, since almost all of them were unique, one of a kind, either the building was different or the team was different or the situation was different, was that no matter how good our plan was on day 0, it was going to be obsolete some way on day 1. And the thing that differentiated the projects that succeeded were they were really good at adjusting as they went. And so, that meant being really, good and honest about understanding where things were deviating and making those adjustments as quickly as possible, and everyone aligning. Since this process is fairly new, at least in this way, we're sure that as much work as we put into planning out this process, there are going to be some places where we're going to need to adjust, and we might need to adjust in some different ways for each panel. So with that, I'd ask for one, if you see things that aren't working, and we'll have a survey at the end, let us know, and we'll make sure that we adjust as we need to. We're going to be going up a learning curve, so I'd also kind of make a request up front for flexibility and some grace, on that front. The other thing to mention is that there is a new submission process as well that we're using to solicit ideas from the public. That may not be as, at least from the public standpoint, as big a point for this advisory panel, just because of the nature as others. But that is a new process, and it's certainly new in for some of the advisory panel areas. We've already, mentioned that this is a fairly fast process. Everyone has a day job. And when we asked for everyone's availabilities, we realized that it was going to be pretty hard for us to get through this entire process without there being a meeting where one or more people may not be able to make it to the meeting. So we appreciate the flexibility. We also understand there may end up being some conflicts that are unavoidable. If there are, we'll move forward because we have to on the dates when most people can make the meeting. But from a support team standpoint, we'll commit to making sure that people who can't make a particular meeting don't miss a beat. All the meetings are going to be recorded. And as well, we'll make sure that we as a team will help keep them up to speed and keep them in the flow of the process. And the last goal is, once again, we're working for consensus within the panels and then at the Spark committee level. Particularly at the Spark committee level, there may be some great ideas that don't end up getting funded at the end of the day. But once again, those ideas won't go away. But we should just be aware that due to the nature of the process, that's going to happen. And just in terms of some of the things that are specific about the pressure points on this panel, this is a little different panel in that it's focused on state government operations. So there are some areas where we're going to really need to understand, that there's probably going to be limited public idea generation around some of these, around the submission forms, maybe not so much from agencies, but also there is a broader funding context, which I'm not that familiar with, but certainly the chairs are and the members of the panel are, to understand, how we think about this set of funds against these opportunities versus other sets of funds. Next slide. So we're going to go into a little bit the kind of funding landscape. But before I do that, any thoughts, questions of kind of what we've gone through to date?
John, this is Mark Hutton. Can you address just what is the cutoff date for submitting considerations?
So in terms of the public submissions, the cutoff date for that is February 16th. That is fairly fast paced. It's been out there, the submission form publicized for, a couple of weeks. A few things to think about with regards to that. This process has been going on for a number of months. So there have been listening tours, et cetera, and also other submissions that have been made, just not through this particular submission form. The team is going back to all of those people and making sure that they submit their proposals through kind of the common template so that we can make apples to apples comparisons across them. Additionally, as the advisory panels themselves come up with ideas, that can happen past that date. So that was just a date around just how long to keep the public aspect of it open. One last thing, I did jump over one slide around the advisory panel rules of engagement, which you have right here. I think I mentioned all these points. The only point I'd mention here around participation is want everyone to be really fully engaged. Realize though, there may be some areas where someone may have a conflict of interest. A lot of cases, we may not be getting down to a level of specificity where that conflict of interest really exists. But if you're getting to feel like you have a potential conflict of interest, just flag it on those ideas and abstain from voting on something where you have a conflict. Other than that, we're looking for high levels of engagement from everyone. Before I go into the funding landscape, any questions? Any? Great. Well, let me continue to move forward. So around the ARPA funds, just wanted to provide a viewpoint for everyone in terms of what these particular Spark funds are, where they sit in the overall sets of funds. And there have been a number of funds over the last couple of years. A lot of them, as Representative Waymaster mentioned, really targeted against the health emergency and the knock-on effects of it due to COVID. These are funds where we have more flexibility and discretion, although certainly some allowability guidelines do continue to exist. So this is a $1.6 billion set of funds. There's also the local funds of about $1 billion that this process doesn't have purview over, but in some cases, there may be some investments being made out of those funds where we'd want to dovetail some things we're doing with what's happening out of those funds and vice versa. On the next slide, one other thing to note, though, to even just hone in a little bit more on kind of what the size of the pot is here, given that these funds have been, available in one sense or another for several months, $869 million worth of the funds have already been, earmarked or allocated. So what we're really talking about is $731 million. That's a minimum number because some of the previous allocations were structured in such a way that if they could be accomplished with less, then the funds could roll back into these funds. And so this is the set of funds where the goal for the Spark Executive Committee is now to take kind of an integrated view. A lot of the previous allocations were made on a one-off basis. And so the goal here is to really be able to think strategically in an integrated sense around how best to apply these funds. And on the next slide is just an indication of here are the things where the places where the allocations were made that constituted that $869 million. So you can take a look at this, at your leisure. And then one last thing. So just to give every single advisory panel a feeling for kind of what the entire integrated view looks like, here are kind of the core areas of focus, at least the primary areas of focus for each one of the 4 advisory panels. And a few things to note is, one is there are some topics that kind of span advisory panels, maybe not quite as much with efficiency and modernization, but for instance, childcare, which is in health and education, certainly is a big need from an economic revitalization standpoint, and technical skills training and reskilling and upskilling is an education issue, but we have it in the economic revitalization panel just because it's so closely aligned to business requirements. And so since we have a consistent support group working across all the panels, we'll make sure that we provide those threads across the panels as we go, and necessary kind of insights across panels around those things. On efficiency and modernization, structuring this one, once again, this is really around state level operations. Coming into this, we worked to kind of pull together a framework for thinking about some of the areas to focus in on, as well as even some situation assessments kind of loosely, as well as some potential examples of things that could fall into each one of those areas. Once again, just meant to be a starting point. We're just here to facilitate the process. So it's going to be up to the panel to decide ultimately where we go in terms of focus within these areas or beyond these areas. The 4 areas here are facilities modernization, IT infrastructure, safety and security, which is both physical and cyber, and continuity of operations. And as we get into the subsequent slides, you'll get to see a little bit better of an overview in terms of what each one of those could entail. The good news is that, from an allowability standpoint, in some of the other advisory panels, there is the allowability guidelines from Treasury, probably have a greater impact around determining which things could get funded within the allowability guidelines. Here, most of the potential opportunities in each one of these 4 areas probably have a lot of runway from an allowability standpoint. And also, I'd note that from a support team standpoint, Widow O'Brien's is involved, and they're going to act as a primary resource for the team to understand, as the team starts identifying potential ideas and opportunity areas, kind of where it stands with regards to allowability. So all of these are potentially important areas, and we'll go through that in a little bit more detail in the following slides, as well as a lot of the things that could be done here to make a difference would fall within the allowability guidelines. So next slide, some kind of frames to use as we kind of walk through this to think about is one, what types of initiatives would help improve efficiency within the branches of state Kansas government? Another lens is, given the COVID's uneven impacts, what initiatives could maximize impact for Kansans? Being able to be, to be easier to do business with and gain support from government services. And also taking a long range view, how can these investments build a foundation for other efforts down the line around improving government efficiency and operations? So before diving into facilities modernization, any kind of thoughts in the last few slides that I went through?
Hey, John, we actually have a question from Representative Wolfmore.
So my question is, it appears that our committee is limited to state sort of modernization, or can this be extended out to maybe local governments, or is it strictly state funded initiatives?
I think it's primarily state, although there would, in some areas, obviously need to be kind of coordination with local. If it's things where the platforms resided across them and needed to be able to interact, there could be an opportunity, I guess, if the panel wanted to make suggestions for local investment as well, but the primary focus was around state. But if the panel ends up having a view on that, we could certainly explore it for a bit, but that was the intent going into it. Okay, with that, I'll go into facilities modernization. And something so this at a high level, a way to think about this is the context, state-owned buildings and other government facilities, that were slated for upgrades prior to the pandemic, and COVID-19 has underscored the importance of, updated building systems. Opportunity, once again, one-time investments, doing things that could make safer work environments for employees and make it more efficient to be able to provide services. This is an area, and I'm not going to try going through this in detail, but there are databases of, how other states are beginning to look at making some allocations out of the SFRF funds. And here are the ones that we were able to pull that had a facilities modernization feel to them. The caveat around this, it's still fairly early in the game across states in this. So some of these are much kind of higher level allocations, and some are more detailed. And the other thing is there are probably going to be a number of other allocations across states made, as they get further into the process of deciding where to spend these funds. But on an ongoing basis, we can certainly, as a support team, provide more detail around this as desired. And basically every one of the four areas, kind of has this general format. So on facilities modernization on slide 21, great. A description around what's in it, renovate the state buildings and update equipment to reduce employee displacement, COVID-19 risk, current situation, which we mentioned before, and a couple examples here: modernizing equipment to support safety measures necessitated by COVID-19 in state facilities. So a couple sub-examples here are really more around air handling and HVAC systems. And the second one, enhance or renovate space to support public health needs. So those could range from things, some examples that were put forward. And this was from, the Department of Administration and other organizations kind of looking at this to say, okay, what are some examples that we can think of that might give people a feel for what could be here? Once again, the panel can go where it wants to go, but, modifying law enforcement facilities to improve inmate isolation to prevent spread of infections, restructure Court of Appeals office and office space in the Kansas Judicial Center, expand the Kansas Judicial Center IT help desk footprint to meet health and safety guidelines. So here are just kind of a few of the examples of what could fall into facilities modernization to act as thought starters. They're probably also actually just specific opportunities to consider as well. So I guess, I'd open it up to everyone here in the chairs, for, what are your thoughts around these opportunities or anything else that could fall in here? We'll have a more detailed and interactive exercise at the end, but just kind of interested in people's thoughts around facilities modernization.
Well, I think one of the biggest things to note, John, and we need to think about the state holistically and not just buildings in Topeka, but we need to think about modernizing buildings throughout the entire state. Because, like one of the proposals that was in the governor's budget, and you go back to a couple slides ago, they were talking about upgrades to National Guard armories. And it was something that the governor had implemented in her budget, which is something that we could definitely have a discussion with in here. I also wanted to mention that as far as the money that has already been dedicated from the 1.6 billion that we received from the federal government, we're doing some facility upgrades here in Topeka. $92.5 million, if you go back a few slides, is actually dedicated to a new KDHE lab, and then also for the renovation of the docking building. But I think for the context of looking at infrastructure, we need to look at the buildings all throughout the state of Kansas to best better the citizens of the state.
Yep. Great. Any other thoughts or comments?
John, I have a comment. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. This is kind of along the lines of the chairman. I was wondering if with all the state facilities, the buildings that we have, they have like a state of the state buildings, where they went into each one of the buildings and looked at the HVAC, all the details of it, because there's probably some that would be more proactive filling out the form versus some that don't.
Yeah.
And I would just, how many buildings do we have in the state? What kind of condition they're in? Will that be part of the process?
John, I could answer that. And what we can do is we can have Kansas Legislative Research Department configure an amount of the buildings throughout the state of Kansas. And I don't know if we can actually get an assessment of how the buildings are, because this is my opinion. I don't think that the state is a very, very good steward of buildings. But we can get a list together of all of the real estate that is owned by the state for this committee to evaluate and see if we can have some type of assessment done on any upgrades that would be needed at this time.
Yeah.
To piggyback on that, the regions have just completed a facilities condition index report for all of our mission critical buildings. And I know they're planning on submitting a request for how we can consolidate some square footage and increase our building efficiency using that data. So we can look for that. I did have one question. It looks like on some of your examples that almost all of them are tied back to transmission of the virus. Is that a criteria or is that just is that kind of what you chose here?
I believe in this area, although I would need to give it, I think that certainly makes it more allowable, but I'll need to check on that. To your first point, do you have a feeling for when the timing is of that report?
You're talking about the Facilities Condition Index report?
Yes.
I think the request will be in, we have the report. We also have a
Okay.
building efficiency report that we put into a 20-year deferred maintenance plan.
Mhm.
And I anticipate by the end of next week that the Regent's Facilities Department will be offering a proposal for a one-time fund to demolish buildings and that are past kind of their useful life, and at the same time utilize those funds to increase our efficiency utilization of our classroom and other critical spaces.
Yep, great. And then to answer your other question, is there anyone on the call from Whit O'Brien's to have a specific view on the facilities modernization allowability, and how broad it is beyond things that are impacted by COVID or addressing COVID? Nope. Yeah, I'm just looking. Okay, we'll follow up with them on that. I mean, I'm just even looking at the way we positioned it earlier around importance for successful pandemic response. But yeah, we'll check and make sure how broad the runway is there for sure. Anything else here before we move on? Oh, I just got a text to tag in Frank Burnham. Frank?
Yeah, it's the only thing that I would add is most state agencies, large agencies, are required to prepare their 5-year capital improvement plan. And those are something that the legislative research would also have access to and be able to provide, where they list their primary concerns, maintenance, upgrades, needs, building. Some of them do assessments, but to Representative Waymaster's point, a majority of them do not. They don't have the internal resources to conduct that level of a study on their facilities.
Okay. Great. Thanks. Well, it doesn't seem like we're going to have any lack of, even though someone may not be doing it, sounds like there's a lot more information we can bring to bear on this. So great. Thank you, Frank. I'll go into IT infrastructure here, partially because I just want to make sure that we get to the point at the end where we have the collaborative exercise. I can tell already it's going to be very fruitful. In terms of IT infrastructure, the context, prior investments, state IT infrastructure created strong foundation for additional upgrades. But the opportunity could exist through this to have some targeted one-time investments towards major planned upgrades that otherwise would take years to be able to take place. So that's kind of the frame to use when we're thinking about this area. On the next slide, just some examples that we've been able to pull so far around some things that seem to feel like it fits this bill from other states. So you can get a feel for, what other people are looking at. Looks like Texas made a pretty big appropriation, around cybersecurity projects. So, the summary around the opportunity for IT infrastructure, ensure interoperable, secure, modern technical infrastructure is in place to support critical state functions, mitigate risk, increase operating efficiencies across agencies, branches of government, et cetera, et cetera. Current situation, once again, the state has already been doing a lot in this area, making incremental investments, completed major data center migration, but this may provide the opportunity to be able to kind of think a little differently about some of those, just due to the nature of these funds. So some examples were accelerate state network modernization to increase efficiency and adaptability. The second one, increased data integration, and this is more data warehouse. And the third one, upgrade backend system, software, hardware to better serve Kansans across a variety of things. Invest in backend tax processing system, adopt cloud-based digital exhibit and evidence platform for courtrooms, complete system upgrade that automates interface to KBI's civil records check system. So just kind of a few examples of some of the things that could fall into the IT infrastructure bucket. Once again, any kind of thoughts or comments around this? At the end, we'll have a chance to do more brainstorming around it, but now that it's fresh in mind.
John, this is Mark. So I think it would help the context when you tell us Texas spent 200 million.
Yep.
Out of how many dollars total?
Okay. Sure.
It gives us a reference as just how much weight they put on that for my.
Great point. Yep. Anyone else? Any thoughts around IT infrastructure, reactions? Great. Well, moving on then. Safety and security. And once again, this was physical safety as well as security as well as cyber. So the context, physical security upgrades, including those to prevent the spread of COVID, and statewide measures to promote and enhance public safety are top of mind. Switch to remote and virtual models obviously underscored the importance of robust and modern cybersecurity systems. And the opportunity here is to really think about both of those. Opportunities, physical safety and security, and digital. In light of this unique set of funds. On this slide, and to your point, Mark, we can look at, anywhere where it's a really large investment. I don't know if any of these quite qualify here. How big a bet is a state making on any of these areas, but these are some of the ones that, the team was able to pull that kind of smacked of being within this area around safety and security. So some of the examples that were put forward in safety and security, one for the panel to think about themselves and also to act as a little bit of thought starters was enhance state cybersecurity to strengthen against security breaches. There was also on 3, which is related, invest in judicial cybersecurity improvements as well. Enhance the physical security in the Capitol complex, idea 2. And idea 4 is upgrade handheld and vehicle mounted emergency radio equipment for KBI. So stop there, kind of a lot of different, areas identified here. Any thoughts or reactions to this list? Oh, we already heard from the team that Texas had $15.8 billion in SFRF to provide context for that $200 million investment in cyber.
I might, this is Joe. I might sort of ask for some clarification again. So we're looking at some of these areas, not necessarily as these specific projects or any specific projects, but we're trying to develop more, thoughts around more high-level programs. So when you, John, say something like enhance state cybersecurity, what I'm looking for clarification on is this advisory panel might try to put together what was the term you used, investment portfolio that would assign some recommended amount to just enhancing state cybersecurity with some recommended projects under it, but not necessarily say, hey, here's project 1 and here's project 2 and here's project 3 and these are the ones we're going to fund, but just at a high level saying, we need to we need to look at cybersecurity for the state, which may, to the point that was made earlier, affect both state and local government, since there are so many interfaces between state and local government, as an example.
Mhm. So are you asking what level would we fly at on this? In what cases are we kind of tagging a, investment proposal, maybe with some examples of what it could be, as opposed to just funding a very specific project with a very specific dollar amount?
Yeah, what are we, I guess that's, what are we going to, when we get to the point of having a deliverable out of this advisory panel, what are we expecting to send to the executive committee so that we as a group can know where to focus our efforts, so that I'm not looking at, a list of projects going, yeah, that one, not that one, yeah, that one, not that one, where I'm more thinking about, cybersecurity from the context of where to apply a program rather than what slate of projects should we be looking at.
I think that's up to the panel itself to identify kind of what's the appropriate level to fly at for each particular area. And also given the amount of time we have, how specific we could get on some of these things, as opposed to thinking about it more as kind of tagging a funding against, generally maybe an area with 3 types of projects that would fall under it. I just can't predict at this point. That's where we'd said at the start, we need to kind of have some build in whatever's the appropriate amount of flexibility in terms of, what types of recommendations are made. But right now, I can't say where this particular one would fall. I don't know if that helped you. Sorry.
So John, if I could try to elaborate on Joe's question. So Joe, your question is if we come up with a particular item for safety and security, how are we going to identify what the actual cost is going to be? Is that what you're?
To a degree, yes. So the cost is on the other side of that same coin of the question I was asking. How are we identifying the effort? Are we going to try to come up with something that says enhance state cybersecurity and then a list of criteria on how those dollars can be applied, regardless of how many dollars are assigned to it? You have to spend them on this list of projects, or here's a bucket with dollars, and who is going to decide what projects that goes to? I guess that's what I'm getting at.
Well, and I guess kind of going back to what I think John has been describing during this kickoff session is that, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, because we've had conversations about this, but I don't think it's the intent of the executive committee with Spark to designate certain pots of money for each of the advisory panels. So when we start going through the process of the different ideas from the submission process, where I think in the previous slide was like 200 items, and we funnel that down all the way to about 7 or 10, that then we will recommend those to the executive committee with Spark. We might have an estimate number of how much that's going to cost, but then the executive committee in Spark is going to make the ultimate decision on what the dollar amount is going to be, and then forward that on to the State Finance Council for the ultimate approval. So we might have an estimation of what the cost may be, but we won't have most likely a request for proposal or anything like that to try to get a specific dollar amount. But we'll have those discussions as we're going through that funnel process, and then ultimately making a recommendation to the Spark Executive Committee.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, you're welcome.
Real quick, I don't know if people saw the feedback from Widow O'Brien's, as a follow-up to the COVID nexus question. No investment ideas do not have to be limited to just COVID response. Treasury final rules provided a great deal of flexibility to address technology and administrative backlogs to increase public access and delivery of government programs and services. So it sounds like there's more flexibility there than may have been portrayed. Any other thoughts on this before we move on? Great. Well, let me get to the last bucket and then we'll have time for the team to really be able to kind of think about, prioritizing across the areas and capturing whether we really did kind of capture everything to think about. So continuity of operations. The context here is state agencies and branches of government continue to encounter operational challenges associated with COVID-19 pandemic and require support to ensure continuity of essential services and ongoing adaptation. And this, I think, was believed to be a fairly modest one-time investments of continuity of state operations. And I believe this one may almost even be thought of a little bit of a kitty of funds of being able to support some of the smaller agencies around making sure that they can have continuity of operations under various scenarios. Here are some examples of those types of efforts from other states. Once again, a lot of them kind of smaller ticket items. Won't try and go through them all in detail. But some examples here around it were improved taxpayer supports to minimize in-person contact during the pandemic, improve online, offline supports to enable Kansas taxpayers to have their questions answered, get additional help as needed, implement central payment processes for the Kansas judicial branch, and modernize the state printing facility. So these are some of the things that were kind of fell into this bucket. Once again, it really did feel like kind of continuity of operations and maybe in some cases for some of the smaller agencies, but it's really being able to adapt to be able to operate and provide services in the context of COVID or maybe, any other type of situation that might potentially disrupt operations. Any thoughts or reactions to this one? This one's kind of a little bit more general. Oh, Frank?
I guess I'll ask the question here. As I look at all four of these categories, something like a data center comes into mind. It could fall into any of these categories depending upon which deficiency you're looking at, or if it's an IT, if it's infrastructure, if it's mechanical systems. So will we be looking at that level of where does it fall, or can it fall into four different categories, if that makes sense? It could be continuity of operations, frankly. I mean, it could be a lot of things when you're looking at something like that.
Yeah, well, we probably don't want the same data center falling into all four. We should probably just kind of pick a place where it should fall. But yeah, I think data centers probably would have been in the IT infrastructure one, or yeah. Yeah, good point. Probably in the IT infrastructure one, but because the data center migration was actually mentioned in the current situation on that one. But regardless, if it's important and it's going to add value from to Kansas, the state of Kansas and Kansans, we just got to make sure we capture it somewhere. All right. Well, I've continually promised that we're going to get to the point where I'm going to be quiet and the panel itself can start debating some of these things. So if you go to slide 35, we've talked about these kind of four broad areas of core focus. And so I guess the question that I'd put to everyone here is a discussion around, and we'll have kind of a collaborative board that we can use around this as our next step and to do some voting. But generally speaking, do these four areas, and I think Frank, you're already touching on it a little bit, kind of capture the lay of the land, or do you think these are kind of missing some things that you expected to see?
I would say, I mean, for me, it looks fairly comprehensive across our mandate of efficiency and modernization. I think it looks like there's a bucket that fits a lot of those categories. I do have some thoughts on software that I want to talk about somewhere at the appropriate time. So,
Okay. That may actually be on the next step where we can kind of make sure that we tag that. Any other thoughts though? Anything that missing from here? Or?
I guess under facilities and modernization, obviously I've seen sewers, waters, infrastructure, utilities have been a major component of the report. Is that something specific under facilities modernization that should be added or qualifying?
We had put that as a general topic under economic revitalization.
Okay.
But I don't know. I mean, if it's something that largely impacts state operations, then maybe we should take that into account here as well. What are your thoughts, Representative Waymaster?
Well, I was just going to say in that case, because, before we started session, I had many that are involved with water wanting to access the ARPA funds in one way or another. I mean, and ARPA water could also fall under healthcare and education. Mm-hmm. It could fall under, like John said, economic revitalization, because for economic development, in some cases of the state, it's very difficult to get water. Or it could fall under us as far as infrastructure needs across the state of Kansas. That's one issue that I know it's kind of pigeonholed right now in economic revitalization, but I think it's open for a conversation.
Yeah.
As far as infrastructure upgrades.
Mm-hmm.
I just give one example. I mean, I know at the local level, they're getting money potentially to replace the water main that's running by a 60-year-old state building. And if the ability was there to tap in with a new system, I mean, I think that would fall under facilities modernization if you're trying to, it's kind of that cross connect with the county and city, maybe local projects, municipal projects. So.
Mm-hmm.
I think kind of tied into that discussion is just kind of the funding model. If we're going to look at, there's going to be some cost sharing between local governments and these funds or the like, so we can stretch these out as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, that would be the intent. Certainly on areas where there are synergies across, the different funding sources. And the other thing coming down the pike is the infrastructure bill as well. And that's still being formulated in terms of kind of where the focus is going to be on that, but it may not be as much in this space. But don't know for sure yet.
I think the other element of facilities modernization needs to include a fairly robust look at life safety areas as well as ADA accessibility issues.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, since we're starting to kind of add some potential points to this, let's go to the next slide. And this is where we are going to start kind of exercise on a collaboration board. And in the chat, you'll see a link to that board. And this is an opportunity if everyone could go to that board to, and we can get it. And we can get that going. Can we get the collaboration board up? Great. So the way this works is, and let us know if it's not working for you, is that everyone can access this, and we have all the tiles represent kind of the broad areas that we had just talked about walking through the document. So the thought here is, first, look at the broad tiles and determine, do we want to add any other tiles? And once we do, make sure we have the right tiles. Then we can, and you can add the tiles, they're going over the plus sign, so anyone can, or you can ask the support team to do it. We can add tiles, and then once we, let's do that between now and say 5:20, look at them and say, do we think we need to add anything here for completeness sake of what the panel wants to look at? And then after 5:20, then we can go through an exercise, a voting exercise across the panels, or the tiles that are here at that point. So I guess one area, Mark, you had mentioned under facilities modernization, did you mention the ADA, looking at that explicitly?
Yeah, so that'd be, I'm not familiar with this layout at all, but I just typed in water infrastructure as one of those under facilities, but ADA and life safety would be two areas that, again, I don't know if this is what you're looking for or not.
Sure. Go into more detail about life safety.
Well, life safety is fire alarm systems, exit requirements.
Got it.
Building exits, etc.
Anyone else see some potential ads across this area or the other ones?
John, I might kind of tag back on what Mark said a lot earlier about what the Board of Regents has done. I don't know what it costs to go through that process or how long that takes. But part of this is efficiency. So as we look at these buildings and what we have, I guess I'm questioning maybe location, usage. Is it the right size for the organization, that kind of thing. So I hate to spend a lot of money on something that really don't fit right. So just a thought.
If I could, just based on my experience, perhaps maybe some of these funds would actually fund the review of that and to get it set up so where the state is all on the same program, if you will. We found at the universities, all the universities were doing something different. And when we brought it all together under one system umbrella, we got much better data, as you would imagine, as well as our ability to maintain it, to maintain that information and that data going forward is critical to being able to address the deferred maintenance issues as well as the efficiency. So it was quite a process, Senator, just and we can share more with you about that kind of one-on-one, but it took us, that was about a 4 to 6 month process that was pretty comprehensive. And like I say, we can get you more information on that. Just getting everybody on the same page, I think, proved valuable to Frank and his world.
So you were looking at kind of, fleet management of the building's fleet. In an integrated way.
Yes, it was a combination of what we call the Facilities Condition Index, which is an industry term for ranking, the condition of a building, from fallen down to very excellent. And then we tied to that a building efficiency study that looked at just the utilization of our buildings related to the mission critical aspects of what we're, like a classroom building. It should be used like 70% of the time. We had some standards that came out of that study. And so we're looking at those two together. And we're saying we've got some buildings, frankly, that need to be torn down that would reduce our deferred maintenance backlog, but also consolidate the utilization of our classroom and research buildings and the like to get more bang out of our buck.
Yeah, so I almost think we put that down as a sub point under facilities renovation. I actually think it should be its own tile, facilities assessment program, because it might impact facilities renovation, but it could also impact just the shape of the fleet.
Yeah.
If I could add to, sometimes having a building maintenance package or a baseline to start with is something that agencies could benefit from. A lot of our institutions have people that have been there 30 plus years. Those people go out the door, they take that knowledge with them, and there's nobody to step in. So it's everything from changing filters, which impacts the air quality, to the longevity of the machinery is critical. And we don't have a state plan, or we don't have a conduit by which we could extend those services. So I think that's something that possibly could be considered, whether they manage it in-house or there's services,
Right.
but having the finances to do such thing.
Is there any sort of database for or tracking of utility spend by square foot or just utility spend in general by facilities?
I can only speak for the Capitol complex. There's a host of things out there, but for like our Capitol complex, it has one central meter that monitors all the buildings. So it's kind of an impossible ask to know, what's actually being spent per square foot. But a standalone facility certainly, and there's services out there that can come out and do those kinds of assessments. Adding additional metering is always a key thing, whether it's condensate return or power generation. I mean, there's other things you can do to your facility to help establish maybe what you could do and how to make your money go a little further in the end from a conservation standpoint.
Actually, I was kind of curious, is there a database of just bills though by all these facilities, or would it just be on a facility by facility basis?
I think based on my knowledge, I think, a lot of these facilities are on central plants. So if you try to parse down too much, you're just not going to get much.
Right.
And so I'm not aware that there's that much tracking of what the energy costs are per building. Again,
but there would be, we could actually look at the bills of the whole plant, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Without getting too technical, what you're putting out and what you're returning in condensate, for example, in your chilled water system tells you how much you're losing, tells you how much, inefficiency there might be in your system. So there's ways to meter and monitor even with a central utility.
We do that. Yeah.
Yeah,
we do that. I was just trying to get a baseline of energy usage period, but for sure, we're familiar with the different things that you can do there to,
Mhm.
you know, CTs to monitor usage on specific circuits and that sort of thing. So, yep. Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other thoughts across the tiles and facilities modernization or the other three areas?
So is this where you want my thoughts on software upgrades?
This would be a good time if it's going to create a new tile. Yep.
Well, it might. My short experience in the legislature and as a business person that spent an ungodly amount of money on IT. A guy told me one time, if you want to know what something's going to cost, go out and get 3 bids and add them all up. And that's what you'll get. So my concern is around any initiative that includes a software initiative. That our history has been that we get in the middle of this and it always costs us a lot more money than we were told it's going to cost us. When I say us, the state. I know there's a number of enhancements that I believe we need to address. I talked briefly with the chair and you yesterday about, or earlier about, the Department of Children and Families still keeps their case records in a 3-ring binder for each child instead of having them in some type of a medical records format. There's, I think, something to look at would be modernization of our vehicle registration and licensure process to where that's all online, like a lot of other states are doing. All of those take a fairly heavy initiative of development of software and training and all that other stuff that goes with it. And so I guess in a long-winded way, I'm asking, how are we going to ensure when we kind of recommend a program that we're going to do to the Spark committee, that we know the number that they're using is going to be adequate to finish the job?
Yep. Good point.
I was going to say, and we kind of talked about this in some of the pre-planning meetings, and this is a thing that's kind of irritated me for quite a while. And Mark kind of touched on it with, renewing your driver's license, but the entire web presence of the state of Kansas is poor.
Yep.
And everybody is going to online applications or in some way going online to find stuff. But we have a spider web of different agencies and departments with different websites, and it's very problematic for people to find stuff for the state of Kansas. So I think we need a centralized, updated web presence for the state of Kansas.
Yep.
And I can add that if you want me to.
Great. Any other thoughts before the next exercise is going to be if everyone has 5 votes and you can place them right where those little thumbs up signs are. You can place all your votes on one tile if you want to, or spread them out across tiles. Now that we have the tiles, and so once again, if we don't, pipe up if you want to add something. Start just initially, this isn't going to eliminate anything, but start getting initially people's thoughts around kind of where they see the greatest needs and opportunities by placing their votes. So do people feel generally we're right, at least as far as we can tell right now around the tiles we have here? Or is there still something that might be missing?
So my network is not really behaving, but I wanted to see if maybe I could add. I added a tile interoperability, and to the point that was made earlier about DCF in particular, but other, and this also touches on a consolidated web presence. One of the issues that we have as a state is getting information from one place into the hands of someone else who needs to use it. And, you might think DCF having 3-ring binders full of information about the children that they're trying to help is bad enough, but it's even worse. And of course, I'm speaking from the perspective of someone in a public safety agency. When one of those DCF investigations turns into a criminal case, getting that information into the hands of a law enforcement officer is very difficult because there's no interoperability. And that's just one example. There are a lot of issues like that. So that's an explanation of what that interoperability word means.
Thanks, Joe. So why don't I propose this? Let's take until 5:32, take 5 minutes, 5:37. Think about, and you can do it yourself or ask someone on the chat to place your votes for you. But place your 5 votes on the various tiles. Once again, you can put up to 5 votes on one tile if you want to. You can spread them out. And this isn't going to eliminate anything. This is just going to at least give us a initial understanding of where, the heat map may exist of where people see some of the biggest opportunity or even just areas to explore in more detail more.
John, one that I might add to that before we get rolling, that cybersecurity. I know very little in that area. And I'm wondering if funds could be used for a cybersecurity assessment, of where we're at with state stuff. So just a thought.
Got it. Do we want to just make that a part of like a comment under the cybersecurity? Yeah.
Whatever you want to do with it.
Yep.
I just assessment's what I'm questioning.
Great. Thank you. So it looks like 3 people have allocated their votes.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out how to get to the screen to do it.
Yeah. If you want to, you can just tell people in the, where you want to, in the chat, where you want to allocate your votes if you're having a hard time.
So I had a question I'll throw out. I went back and read the slide on public health improvements. And when you read those descriptions, they seem like specific renovations to the facility.
Mm-hmm.
Are they too similar, or is facilities renovations deferred maintenance? And I guess looking for some clarity there. It seems to almost be the same thing.
Yeah.
Depending on how you look at it.
Facilities modernization. Yeah, under facilities modernization, when I look at the two examples. What I see is one that's more modernizing equipment. And the examples I saw were things like air handlers and HVAC systems. The second one was more enhancing or renovating the space to support public health needs. So that could be something, I don't know, conference rooms or expanding space or.
Right.
So it just may be kind of two different use cases.
Thank you.
And this is going to get a whole lot easier once we get down to specific ideas and projects and programs. So realize here, this is kind of at an aggregate level. This was just to try and kind of just begin to understand whether we're hitting the right areas and kind of identifying where we might need to continue to do a little bit more work in some things. So 5, 6, 10, 12, 16, 19, 20, 26. So I have about 30 votes. So 6 people. Is anyone still waiting to vote? Okay, Mark just put in his votes that he wants. Oh. Okay, so I'm still. All right. Thanks for your patience. Just putting a few additional ones that came in through the chat to me. Anna, let me know when you've finished, please.
Finished. Thank you.
Great. Awesome. I guess before we move on, what are people's thoughts now that they see kind of where the voting ended up? Once again, this isn't limiting us to these areas. It was just meant to be kind of an initial, attempt to get people's thoughts and kind of engaged in thinking about scope and focus. And what Anna did just now was sorted it. So you're seeing the highest vote getting areas on the top. So good ad mark on the facilities assessment program because it wasn't on the list to begin with. And it's the highest vote getter. So
Yeah, no good deed goes unpunished.
yeah. All right. Well, with that, let's. That was a good exercise. We're going to follow up as well as we think about with the chairs and as we think about kind of next steps and prepping for the next session. But let's go back to the document real quick, and we'll kind of close this out. I will attempt to land the plane, so to speak. Go to slide 38. So, and I'll get through all this faster in 15 minutes, but once again, we touched on it before, the idea submission form is out there. So don't necessarily think there are going to be lots of submissions from the public here, but take a look at the form, and to the extent that you think some ideas should be in there, point people in that direction or add them yourself. And we'll give you the information about where to reach. We've already sent it out once. Slide 39. Once again, this is just the first session and kickoff. We're going to be kind of moving on to the next session, the initial idea brainstorm. We should have some view then when we get there in terms of some of the emerging submissions. But the goal then is going to be start diving into some of these areas as well and looking at the submissions and just the expertise of this group brainstorming on some potential ideas and solutions, and particularly ones where we want to do some more deep dives on them. And then we'll begin to start as a group thinking about the filtering criteria. And we're going to work, we have everyone's availabilities. We're going to work with the chairs as well to try and lock in the date for meeting 2, and if we can for meeting 3 as well, just so everyone kind of has a view from an availability standpoint on their calendars. Go to the next slide. So in terms of the homework between now and then, really continue to review the process, the pre-reads, think about, these areas that we've just identified, and, brainstorm on other examples of ideas in those areas. And the other thing to also think about is if in any of these areas you feel that we should bring some additional experts in, let us know. And we could either, have them be part of a future session, providing some expertise around an important topic, or even doing maybe like a webinar on the side for the team. On the next slide, we highlight, and everyone should have this document, we've created Microsoft Teams folders for each one of the panels. And we'll also email a link out to that with a few other things after the session. But on each one of those, we're going to have investment proposal submissions. So what we're going to do is periodically, probably every week, kind of update, here are the submissions that have come in. We just have a little bit of an initial step between them because some of the submissions so far haven't been complete, and we're needing to kind of work with the people who submitted them to make sure they're complete. But we'll have kind of weekly downloads that you can look at in terms of submissions, resources in terms of information or any of the documents, recordings as well, and also resources for the advisory panels in terms of people on the team and how to contact them. And then, once again, I talked about what we're going to be covering in that next session. We're going to start really diving into submissions to date and brainstorming ideas. So start getting your head around thinking about that. And finally, in the interest of, continuous improvement and making sure that we get feedback along the way. We have an exit survey. I think that that's going out in the chat. It's also going to go out in a follow-up email that we're going to be sending out. So just want to make sure everyone's aware of that. Anyway, just wanted to make sure kind of I got all that closing stuff out of the way. But I guess having gone through all this now, I'd open it up to anyone in the panel, the chairs, any thoughts or comments now that we've kind of reached near the end of the kickoff session. Mark, Representative Waymaster, anything?
Well, I just want to say, thank you, John, for facilitating the meeting today and walking us through the process of how the advisory panels are going to be determining on what areas and how the process is going to be in having the discussion in regards to that. And then obviously then we'll have those relayed to the executive SPARK committee. We are planning to have a meeting probably at the latter part of next week. And that's when we're going to be, I think, kind of starting with the ideas. I don't know if we'll have all the submissions to us, but as John mentioned before, this particular advisory panel probably won't see too much from the general public. We'll probably be seeing a lot more from forms of government or the state agencies. So it'll be a little bit different than the other 3 advisory panels. But again, I just want to say thank you, John, for the walkthrough and the kickoff meeting this evening.
Well, thank you. Thanks for all the engagement. And this has been great. Really appreciate it. Look forward to working with everyone. And thanks for your time. Thank you.